The very first thing that I did when I booted up Balatro was to get to the save file menu and hit this button. Why was I so excited to skip all of this game's progression, and so then why does it even have it? First, and maybe most obviously, let's ask, am I just being impatient, as if I want to try all of the things right now? Well, it's true that I do sometimes play these games for less time than you otherwise would. It could look like rushing through it. Obviously, if you skip the unlocks and then play the game after those unlocks for just as long as everybody else, you do technically play the game for less time. But I mean, I want the density of experience. Wanting to get to the fun part, at least the fun part to me, isn't a bad thing. A simple example for me is in Limbus Company. In this game, you can unlock new character identities and abilities using a currency you get from just playing the game normally, doing dailies and weeklies. Now, I've unlocked just about everything that I can at the moment, so I can't show you an example of that easily. Only things that I can't currently unlock are in this shop anymore. But my point is that it's because I own those things that I'm excited to make all these different teams, mix and match egos and identities, and create these interesting compositions. We often iterate almost every single week when I stream this with some of you folks. And of course I keep playing despite having all of these options unlocked because that's the part of the game that I wanted to get to. If I had to unlock everything first, well, I mean, I guess I did, but as I was unlocking everything first, I wasn't as interested in the game because I didn't have different options to use. If the thing I was going to like about the game was choosing lots of different teams and setting up different combinations of options, like many games, Limbus Company really didn't get to that point for a long time. And so I don't think that's really being impatient, that's just there's something that the game does well that it does not do for quite some hours that you play it. Although this is hardly specific to Limbus Company. I'm sure you can think of many, many games where this was the case. A common way it's said is that the end game is, kind of different than the rest of the game leading up to it. Obviously, in Limbus Company, one reason you have to unlock this stuff is because although you can unlock everything for free, fairly easily, and perfectly reliably without engaging in the monetization, these unlocks are also how the game is monetized. That's how they make money. But the great majority of games that don't monetize through unlocks still have them. So of course that's not the only reason why unlocks are there. In Balatro, I guess the equivalent is that unlocking everything feels to me like saying, give me all of the possible support for any archetype or strategy I can think of right now. And so that sounds good to me. I want the options. That's what drives me to play. I don't want to conceive of a strategy and then realize it's not any good now, but in 5 hours I'll maybe have unlocked the jokers or whatever that make it good. To me, that's just disappointing. Like the game isn't there with me, egging me on to try this fun idea I had. It's instead telling me to calm down and try again later. Realizing my ideas is a big part of why I play these games. But you can see how in both games, it's going to depend a lot on the player's perspective. Balatro is arguably more of a game about seeing what you get than precisely calibrating a team. You can imagine it being overwhelming for some people in Balatro, like I could see it being overwhelming for me too. I said I want as many options for an idea I have in a given run right now as are available. But it's probably easier for some people if there are just less things to inspire a new idea all at once, and they get to focus on one thing at a time. They're re-rolling for 1 or 2 specific new jokers, and not trying to keep 3 or 4 build enablers in their head all at once right away. Yeah, so to this point, I don't think it comes down to impatience. If I basically want to play the game all the same, I just would prefer to spend more of my time playing it with more things unlocked. I think it's true that it makes a bit less sense in Balatro than in some other types of games. It's not like I can guarantee I get the joker I want, even if it's unlocked, so there's less clear reason for my urgency to unlock everything. To some extent, I think I was just excited to be able to hit that button. Like the concept of bypassing progression itself was partly what I wanted. So, okay, is it just that these progression systems generally just suck? Well, in Balatro, I don't know, of course, I hit the button, but let's imagine in general, maybe other people are putting up with unlocking stuff, but they aren't having as much fun as they could be having. It could also be me in a way, that I'm just playing a lot of games which happen to all have kind of unsatisfying progression systems. Maybe I'm just very unlucky. I've played quite a lot of games, but that's still only a small fraction of all total games. Still a very small sample size. Are those ones I've played just the bad ones in terms of progression systems, and that's why I want to skip them so bad? Or are the progression systems generally just not that great, and I'm just the one who's not putting up with them? I personally, no, I don't think this is the answer. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to enjoy progression. Video games and their leveling up and such are like therapy for our modern society, where you constantly have to put effort into things to stay alive, but very little gives you any direct feedback or benefit. You constantly have to force yourself to exert effort for no clear reward. And I say that while that is obviously necessary, it's unhealthy, it's depressing. Video games are often quite the opposite. I mean, look at this. Leveling up, unlocking new weapons or abilities, or furthering your deck. It's so immediate and tactile, and it feels like the things you do, the things you put effort into, you get an immediate call and response from the world. So yeah, I think it's fairly easy to demonstrate the potential value of progressing, rather than saying, oh, other people are putting up with the progression and I'm so much better for not putting up with it. It's more like, what's wrong with me for not liking that obviously positive aspect of games, you know? But okay, it's hard to quantify in the first place. In one of my previous videos about the unlock system here in God of Weapons, I had talked about how it would be interesting to see if a game would still be fun to me if I unlocked everything from the start. I was kind of frustrated about God of Weapons unlock system because it's so interesting to have a lot of items and have them be curated to make a specific build, but the unlock system is really frustrating. There's the whole video about that. I claimed that I would still really like the game. I want to do this. And so if you unlocked everything from the start, I would still want to play the game, but of course few games let us check, and then along came Balatro here. It would be interesting to somehow show people a progression system, but then get people who wouldn't otherwise have chosen to do so to bypass everything. You know, force them to hit the button, and then see if they'd keep playing. We got to check if I would indeed play a game a lot if I were given the chance to unlock everything, and the answer seems to be yes, I would. I have been playing a lot of Balatro. It would be interesting to see if other people would really be so different. You can mod games to unlock everything at times too, of course. The button doesn't have to literally be in the game. And I do have special circumstances in some games where I have most things unlocked, but other players normally don't have a way to do that. Yeah, that's another thing. I'm going to add a section. Is it because I do this for a living? I think it's helpful not to assume we're special when analyzing something like this. I try to assume I'm not particularly unique, and so I'm probably not the only one who's experiencing a given thing that I'm trying to figure out. But it's not impossible that very few people share this dislike of unlocking stuff, and the reason for that is that it is pretty specific to me. Maybe it's because of how I make videos. That's something that wouldn't apply to most other players. Wanting to experience lots of games, and then it just takes a while to get to the part that I want to discuss in videos, certainly seems like something that would make you less patient with a game's progression. And obviously also it's just very time prohibitive. I'm not surprised there aren't that many channels like this one, where I cover a wide variety of games build systems. It's not really about specific builds, but it's not really about games in general either. It's kind of a place in between, because it is difficult to have enough time to deeply understand enough games that you have a variety of stuff to discuss. So not just covering games, but build systems specifically, and a variety of them, you could say I'm on average going to want more of the stuff in a game too. And then I'd need to grind for more of the stuff in that game. So sure, I dislike the unlock system more than most people. Maybe I'm using it more than most people. I mean, it's tricky because I'm really not much of a completionist. Like, I really don't care about getting everything, but I'm gonna want to try, everything there is to try. No one knows all builds, but I try really hard to think of as many of them as I possibly can, and so then maybe I want like more of the stuff in the game than average, sure. And in some games, for example in Warframe, I don't think I'd have time to keep up with unlocking everything conventionally. I'm part of Warframe's creator program, and I was part of the Warframe partner program before it. The idea of these programs is that every update, we get a little selection of stuff as part of that program in the update that lets us kind of jumpstart our coverage of it. If we want to discuss things in the update, for a lot of people it's doing news and such. For me, it's usually doing builds. I get a lot out of getting the augments, for example, and the basic frame and the new weapons and stuff, of course. So that we can keep up with the game without having to spend more of our time on it than we can if we cover a variety of games. The idea from Digital Extremes, our developer side, is that we creators can play lots of different games, yet Warframe can still be a frequent topic in our videos. And for me, this is crucial if I'm to continue discussing builds and build systems in many games, including in Warframe and games like it. Otherwise, I'd have to spend most of the time that I have for work just having the things you could make builds with in this one game, and then it would be impossible to discuss builds and build systems in general for a living. Again, another reason why maybe I haven't seen that many other channels like this. It can really change a game, though. I mean, for Warframe, it means that I play the update with the new stuff, not to unlock the new stuff. And that's quite different than a lot of people's experience by default. In some other games, you can install mods that unlock everything. I've done that in a few sorts of games. And in Balatro, you can imagine how someone who hits the button or doesn't hit the button is going to have a pretty different experience. They might feel differently about the game as a whole. Though ultimately, I think that isn't much different than how people can interpret the game systems differently. I hear people all the time say about games like this that a certain or other unlock in the game is just sort of pointless because it's generally better to use this or that, when to me it's kind of a given that something that is specific but in its specific context is really good. That's like the whole point of the game. I mean, there wouldn't be a variety of stuff if you weren't meant to get to enjoy a variety of things. And so provided they're well balanced, I mean, of course there's a point to having something that isn't good all the time, but then it's only sometimes good. Anyway, it's a matter of perspective, of course. So there are some reasons related to my videos that I find unlocking stuff inconvenient at times, and it makes sense that games would still have unlocking systems even if this is an issue. Like, this problem only affects an extremely tiny percentage of all people playing games. You might consider this point to be a valid answer to this video's question. This is why I want to bypass unlocks so much, and yet they're still everywhere. It's simply a rather unique problem. It's because I'm trying to make videos about these games. I'm even trying to make them in a kind of unique way, like about build systems specifically. But I think there's more to it. I mean, I dislike these systems. I dislike unlocking stuff. It's not merely annoying for me. It often feels kind of pointless or empty. All right, let's go a little harder. Maybe it's because I'm skeptical. It's hard to know if these games' end games will be good, if their build systems will be fun. It would be good if the journey to get there was fun, but the unlocks are, again, often sort of a tutorial, and so if I feel like I don't need that, I understand where it's going, or I think I understand where it's going, and I want to check if I feel like the game is worth our time. I'm going to discuss it with all of you. Will it be interesting to you? It's very desirable for me to be able to jump to the end and kind of take a look at what the sort of end game state of the game will look like, or to play games where that isn't as much of a thing, like Balatro to some extent. Now, I can hear a potential objection. Some people would say, well, of course you have to give the game a chance and wait to see if it's any good. But, like, why, though? I don't see why that makes sense as a given. You literally have no choice a lot of the time, yes, but that's not a positive thing. I see being able to get a sense of the game as something that makes the game itself worth playing. In Balatro, I could see people pressing the button, unlocking everything, doing a few runs with everything unlocked to kind of check if the game was doing systems in a way they found interesting, and then doing a different save file where they no longer use everything unlocked because they've kind of confirmed that the game is doing what they like. That's not me, but you can imagine someone doing that. I guess I just value the ability to check like that more than most people, and then I also am a person who kind of just wants to play the fully unlocked version of the game. I don't find the progression thing, we talked about that in that other section, there's something broken in me and I just don't value the progression feeling as much. I don't know, I can't help but say that it seems to me like I get to spend more time playing interesting games and less time wading through slowly paced games that way. A big point here is that I do definitely have less patience for some aspects of games, and I want to give you an example of that. Here's Tales of Arise, pretty early on, it's maybe like an hour into the game, and already the game has revealed some potentially pretty interesting systems. I like this idea they're going for where you can plan a sort of priority order for your combat party, and they've combined that with this option to have combat be full auto, kind of semi-auto with some auto-targeting and auto behavior from your companions, or fully manual. The idea of making the game just about making a build, even though it has sort of live action combat, and then sort of switching that around, maybe you feel like a boss is harder, so you go more manual, is something I've been interested in a lot of games, but you can see how I feel like that's not going to be that interesting for quite some time. To have enough party members and enough options at this point in the game, it feels like it's going to be a while before that happens. I'm just not sure that's worth it if I could play several other interesting things in the time that it would take for this one thing to like maybe be okay. And politely, I don't think the story's pacing is going to change even after that. Now, it's very possible that this game picks up mere minutes after where I left off. In fact, actually, when I got this footage, I had stopped playing the game and I felt kind of lukewarm on it, and I wrote this part of the script, but the few minutes I played to get this little bit of combat footage just to show you, I actually did like a bit more. Like, it really sped up all of a sudden. So I'm not just saying, it might be that mere minutes after this, it really opens up, but we have to make a call about every game that we play, and I'm just not gonna choose the ones that I have to wait 15 hours to find out if it's a good idea to keep playing. Now, this is another place where my previous point about context unique to me or somewhat more unique to me may be a factor as well. Like, you can imagine if you buy a game for $60, you understand why people might wait a little longer to pass judgment or give up on it. I played Tales of Arise on Game Pass. Balatro is a lot less than $60. It doesn't really make it make any more sense to give the game more of a shake, purely theoretically, but if in practice that's the game you have with the money you spent, yeah, obviously that's one thing, that's just the reality of the situation sometimes. And I already have dozens of other games I want to play, and I'm fairly confident they'll be fun to me. That's also not most folks' experience. It takes energy and effort to find lots of games you like. That's part of why these huge games that I feel like don't particularly respect the player's time often do well. They still have the marketing to find people who understandably don't have the time to just seek out games themselves. Balatro, on the other hand, it's no coincidence that as a more independent game, this gets you right into the action. To some extent then, the bit I said earlier about me just not putting up with slowly paced unlocks is partly the answer here. It's just that I don't put up with those slowly paced unlocks for a reason that can't easily apply to most people. I have way more time to find way more games I would enjoy. I get to make a career out of precisely locating my taste in games. It's largely making builds and customizing my playstyle. That's a great honor, and I try to bring you along with me. I know that some of you folks who support me and such are doing so because you also like to pursue your specific taste in games. Part of my goal is to make that easier for you. I do think people would have more fun if they were more critical of games and pushed harder to find more specifically what they liked, but that takes time and effort, and I am here to help. I would like to say that there are many fantastic games nowadays that are inexpensive or free. So if I may say so, I do think many people would have more fun if they dropped slightly more games. Demand a bit more of what you choose to spend your limited free time on. I wonder if this is just what happens once we've played a nice variety of games. The beginning of most games and their unlock systems becomes familiar, and it doesn't have as much of a clear purpose. And so ultimately, I think the reason why I dislike unlock systems most of the time is because while I want the journey and not the destination, a certain kind of journey in these games starts close to what would be the end of the game for many players. So then hitting that button in Balatro, a feature like that, lets players who are comfortable with these systems jump ahead, something that's quite individual, very subjective and specific to each person. I think that is a pretty complete answer to this video's question, and I do hope to see a button like this in many more games going forward. I bet we will see that become more common. Finally, I can imagine this might seem too limited in scope, like a lot of work, a long video, for something very few people would want. Why go to the trouble, you might ask? The extremely rare person that wants to skip the unlocks can mod the game to bypass them, right? That's not always so easy, but fair enough. Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's not like I'm so special. Consider why Balatro has the ability to unlock everything. And more games are including less linear unlock systems. As games get older and wiser as an entertainment medium, more and more players will get to the point where they feel similarly like unlocking the basic stuff just doesn't have much value. I do think more and more people will want to hit an unlock all button if it's made available, but there will still be tons of people who don't want that, so a flexible implementation that serves both circumstances seems really worthwhile to me. We'll have to wait and find out if that's how things end up. I've been Zandy. Thanks for watching this video, folks. It's been nice to have you aboard. Perhaps you'll choose where we're off to next.